I was washing dishes on a Thursday evening when my son walked into the kitchen and said, "Dad, who's the guy that comes over after school?" He said it the way a 10-year-old says everything, casual, matter of fact, already moving toward the refrigerator before the words had fully landed. Like he was asking me what was for dinner. I turned off the faucet. "What guy?" I said. Owen shrugged. "The guy in the blue truck. He comes when you're at work. Mom tells us to go upstairs." I stood at the sink with wet hands and I looked at my son and I kept my face completely still. Owen grabbed a juice box and wandered back toward the living room. He had no idea what he'd just handed me. My wife Rachel was upstairs giving our daughter a bath. I could hear the water running through the ceiling. Normal sounds. Normal Thursday. I dried my hands on the dish towel. I folded it. I hung it back on the oven handle. And I walked into the garage and sat in my car in the dark for about 20 minutes, thinking through exactly what I was going to do next. I did not go upstairs and ask Rachel about the man in the blue truck. Not that night. Not for another 3 weeks. But let me start from the beginning. My name is Ray. Raymond Kowalski. I'm 46 years old and I've worked in electrical contracting for most of my adult life. Started out doing residential work for a company out of Columbus, Ohio, got my master electrician license at 31, eventually landed a project supervisor position with a mid-size commercial contractor. Mostly office buildings and retail fit-outs. I manage crews, coordinate with general contractors, review plans. It keeps me on job sites most of the day and behind a desk for the rest of it. Rachel and I met when we were both 28. She was working as a dental hygienist. We dated for 2 years, got married, bought a house in Westerville, a suburb northeast of Columbus, good schools, quiet streets, the kind of neighborhood where people leave their garage doors open on Saturday mornings while they do yard work. We had Owen, who was 10, and Lily, who was 7. Rachel had cut back to part-time after Lily was born. She worked Tuesday and Thursday mornings at the dental office, done by noon, home before the kids got off the bus. The rest of the time she was running the house, doing the school pickup, managing the calendar. Standard suburban arrangement. Nothing unusual about it. We were not a couple in crisis. That's the thing I keep coming back to. We weren't fighting. We weren't cold toward each other. We went out to dinner on Friday nights when my mother could watch the kids. We had a vacation planned for Myrtle Beach in August. Everything on the surface looked exactly like what it was supposed to look like. The first sign I had missed, completely, genuinely missed, was that Rachel had started being vague about her Tuesdays and Thursdays. Not obviously vague. Just slightly. I ran some errands. I stopped by Ashley's. Small disconnects between where she said she'd been and small details that didn't quite line up. I hadn't flagged any of it because I hadn't been paying that kind of attention. Until Owen told me about the man in the blue truck. After Owen said what he said, I did not sleep well that night. I lay in the dark next to Rachel and I ran through everything I could remember from the past several months. The vague Tuesdays. A new gym bag I'd noticed but not commented on. A night about 6 weeks back when Rachel had seemed off, distracted, a little guilty acting, and I'd asked if everything was okay and she'd said she was just tired. I'd accepted it. I thought about the kids being sent upstairs. That detail kept coming back to me. That was not a casual thing. You don't send your kids to their rooms when a repairman comes by. You don't send them upstairs for a neighbor dropping something off. You send them upstairs when you need privacy. When someone is there who cannot be seen. The next morning I dropped Owen at school, came back home, kissed Rachel goodbye when she left for work, and then I drove to Home Depot. I bought two Wisecam V3 cameras. Small, white, about the size of a hockey puck. $12 each on sale. I'd used them on job sites before for remote monitoring. I knew exactly how they worked. They connect to your home Wi-Fi, record continuously to a microSD card, and stream live to your phone from anywhere. Motion alerts, two-way audio, night vision. For $24 total, I had a surveillance system that would hold up in any context I needed it to. I thought carefully about placement. The front of the house had a covered porch with a ceiling. I put the first camera up there, tucked into the corner behind a hanging plant basket Rachel had put up 2 springs ago. Angle covered the entire driveway, the front walkway, and the street. Anyone pulling up to the house would be on camera from the moment they turned onto our block. The second camera was trickier. I needed interior coverage, but I couldn't put it anywhere Rachel would find it during her regular cleaning routine. I settled on the living room bookshelf. We had one of those big IKEA units covering most of one wall, packed with books and picture frames and the kind of decorative objects that accumulate in a house over 12 years of marriage. I put the camera behind a large hardcover book on the third shelf, lens just clearing the spine. From 3 feet away you couldn't see it. It covered the living room, the bottom of the stairs, and the entryway. I installed both cameras while Rachel was at work. Took me 40 minutes. I connected them to a separate Wi-Fi network I set up on an old router I had in the garage, not our household network, a separate one, so there'd be no chance of the cameras showing up in our device list if Rachel ever checked. Then I went to work. The alerts started the following Tuesday. Tuesday, March 11th, 12:47 p.m. I'm on a job site in Dublin, Ohio, commercial office fit-out, 3rd floor, coordinating with the drywall crew. My phone buzzes. Motion alert from the front porch camera. I step away from the crew and open the app. A blue Ford F-250 pickup pulls up in front of my house. Parks on the street, not in the driveway. The driver gets out. Male, I'd guess mid to late 40s, heavy set, wearing a canvas work jacket and a ball cap. He walks up the front path without hesitation. The way you walk to a place you've been to many times. Rachel opens the door before he even knocks. She steps back to let him in. She's smiling. The door closes. I'm standing on the 3rd floor of an office building in Dublin, Ohio, looking at this on a 4-inch screen, and my hands are completely steady. I don't know why. I just remember being very calm. Very focused. I watched the interior camera next. Living room was clear, they didn't come in that direction. I could see the bottom of the stairs. For a moment I thought about Owen's words again, Mom tells us to go upstairs, and then I stopped thinking about it because my kids weren't home right now and I needed to concentrate. I noted the time. I went back to work. I managed my crew for the rest of the afternoon. At 3:02 p.m. my phone buzzed again. Front porch camera. The man in the canvas jacket came out the front door. Rachel stood in the doorway for a moment. She did not come out onto the porch. He walked to the blue F-250, got in, and drove away. He had been inside my house for 2 hours and 15 minutes. I got a clear shot of the truck's front plate on his way out. Ohio plate. I ran it through a contact I have, a guy named Phil who does insurance investigations and has access to DMV lookups through his license. I called him from my truck on the way home, told him I needed a name on a plate, no other details. Phil called me back before I got home. The F-250 was registered to a man named Gary Suttles. Age 49. Address in Gahanna, Ohio, about 12 minutes from my house. I googled Gary Suttles that night on my phone in the bathroom with the door locked. He had a Facebook profile. Public. Divorced, according to his relationship status. He worked, according to his profile, in HVAC installation. He had photos of himself at various job sites, photos of his truck, a few photos of him fishing. He looked like exactly what he was, a middle-aged tradesman with a Facebook profile he updated twice a year. There was nothing remarkable about Gary Suttles. That almost made it worse. Over the next 2 weeks I documented 4 more visits. Always Tuesday or Thursday. Always between noon and 2:30 or 3. Always the blue F-250, always Gary, always Rachel opening the door before he knocked. I had timestamps. I had video clips. I had a name and an address and the vehicle registration. On the 4th visit I did something I hadn't done the first 3 times. I left work at noon, drove home, and parked 2 blocks away on a parallel street. I walked to the corner and stood there for 90 minutes behind a tree with my phone out, shooting video of the truck parked in front of my house. Not because I needed more evidence. I had plenty. Because I needed to see it with my own eyes. To make it real in a way that a phone screen couldn't. The F-250 sat in front of my house in the pale March sunlight for 90 minutes while I stood on the corner and watched it. Then the door opened, Gary came out, got in the truck, and drove away. I watched him go. Then I walked back to my car and drove back to the job site. I called a family law attorney named Susan Garvey that same afternoon. Susan Garvey told me on our first call that I had more than enough documentation to proceed. She also told me that Ohio is a no-fault divorce state, meaning the affair evidence wouldn't directly change property division, but it could absolutely influence custody arrangements if I could demonstrate that the children had been present in the home during these visits and had been deliberately kept away from a stranger their father had never met. That phrase, a stranger their father had never met, was the one that landed. I asked Susan if she thought a direct confrontation would hurt my case. She said it depends entirely on how it's handled. She said if I could do it in a controlled way, in front of witnesses or on camera, and keep it calm, it could actually be useful documentation of Rachel's response. I thought about that for a week. Then I planned it. The following Tuesday I called into work and told my project manager I had a family situation and would be remote for the day. True statement. I drove Owen to school at the normal time, dropped Lily at her Tuesday morning art class at 9 a.m. the way I sometimes did, and came back home at 9:45. Rachel was in the kitchen. She looked surprised to see me. I told her I was working from home. She said okay. She seemed slightly off but not alarmed. At 11:30 she told me she was going to run to the grocery store. She left in her Honda Pilot. I watched her go from the living room window. I went to my car and I waited. At 12:39 the blue F-250 turned onto our street. I watched it park from 2 houses down where I was sitting in my Silverado. Gary Suttles got out. He walked up to my front door the same way he always did. He had a to-go coffee cup in one hand. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again. I got out of my truck. I walked up the front path at a normal pace. Gary Suttles was standing on my porch holding his coffee when he heard me coming and turned around. He looked at me the way a man looks at someone he doesn't recognize on a stranger's porch. Not guilty. Just uncertain. I said, "Can I help you?" He said, "I'm looking for Rachel." I said, "She's not here. I'm her husband." The word husband did something to his face. It moved through him visibly. I had my phone in my hand with the camera running. I was holding it at my side, angled up. I'd practiced the angle in the driveway that morning. I said, "You've been here 4 times in the last 2 weeks. Tuesdays and Thursdays. About 2 hours each time." My son told me about the man in the blue truck. Gary Suttles said nothing for about 5 seconds. Then he said, "Look, man." I said, "I don't need you to explain anything. I have everything on camera. I just wanted to see your face." He laughed. Quickly. The F-250 was gone in under a minute. I stood on my own porch for a moment. Then I called Rachel. She picked up on the second ring. I could hear the grocery store in the background, Cartwheel's PA system. I said, "Gary just left. He sends his regards." Silence. I said, "Come home, Rachel." She was home in 11 minutes. We sat at the kitchen table and I put my phone on the table between us with the camera footage already queued up. I didn't raise my voice once. I showed her the footage. I showed her the timestamp log I'd been keeping in a Notes app: dates, times, durations. I showed her Gary Suttles' name and plate registration. She cried. She said she was sorry. She said it had started in January. I said, "I know when it started. I'd been watching since March." Then I told her I had already spoken to a family law attorney and that I would be filing for divorce. 3 days after the confrontation, Susan Garvey called me with something I hadn't anticipated. During the routine asset discovery process, she'd asked me to compile a list of all household accounts and financial instruments. I pulled everything together: joint checking, joint savings, my retirement account, Rachel's retirement account, the kids' college funds, the mortgage. The college funds were wrong. Owen and Lily each had a $529 college savings account. We'd been contributing to them since the kids were born. Owen should have had somewhere around $18,000 in it. Lily's around $12,000. Owen's had $11,200. Lily's had $7,400. Nearly $11,000 was gone across both accounts. The withdrawals had happened in small increments: $500 here, $800 there, over the previous 14 months. The account allowed one designated co-manager, and Rachel had been managing the accounts since we opened them. I had online access, but I hadn't checked the balances in over a year. Why would I? They were the kids' college funds. Susan went quiet when I read her the numbers. I asked her what we were looking at. She said, "Ray, if those funds were used for personal expenditures unrelated to education, that's potentially marital waste. Depending on what she spent it on, it could also be something more serious." I pulled 3 months of Rachel's personal bank statements. She kept them in a file folder in the home office, paper statements, one of those old school organizational habits she'd had since before we got married. I'd had access to that folder for 12 years and never had a reason to look. The pattern was clear. Cash withdrawals following each $529 transfer. And 3 Venmo payments, each between $400 and $600, to an account listed as G. Suttles. She had used our children's college money to give cash to Gary Suttles. I called Susan back within the hour. Susan called a forensic accountant she worked with. The forensic accountant pulled a full picture over the next week. Total marital waste documented, $10,800. Directly traceable to Rachel's personal expenditures and transfers to Gary Suttles. Susan filed the divorce petition with the waste documentation attached as an exhibit. Rachel moved into her parents' house in April. Owen and Lily stayed with me, same school, same routines, same bedrooms. Rachel had them on weekends, which she maintained consistently. I'll give her that. Owen knew something was wrong before we told him. Kids always do. When Rachel and I sat them down and explained that Mom and Dad were going to be living in different houses, Owen didn't cry. He nodded slowly the way he does when he's processing something. Lily cried. I held her for a long time. I told them both, multiple times in the weeks that followed, that they were loved and that none of this was their fault and that both their parents were going to be at every single soccer game and school play and birthday. I meant every word. Rachel lost her job at the dental practice in May. I don't know the full circumstances, she didn't volunteer them and I didn't ask. Our communication went through Susan's office for most of the spring. The social fallout was significant. We had a tight group of neighborhood couples and school parents. When the story got out, and it got out, because these things always do in suburbs, most of them went quiet. A few reached out to me directly. Nobody openly defended Rachel, at least not to my face. Gary Suttles, as far as I know, moved on without consequences beyond the obvious humiliation of being confronted on a stranger's porch. There was no criminal case against him, he hadn't done anything technically illegal. He was just a divorced man in his 40s who made bad choices. I don't spend much time thinking about Gary Suttles. What I do think about, sometimes, is the $10,800. Owen and Lily's money. That's the part that stays with me. Not the betrayal of me, I can process that, put it somewhere, move on. But she took from her own kids to fund something she should never have been doing. That's a harder thing to fold up and put away. The divorce was finalized in late September. 7 months from confrontation to signature. Susan was exceptional. Because I had entered the process with complete documentation and because the marital waste claim was well supported, the settlement was clean and favorable. I kept the house. I kept the retirement account intact. The 529 accounts were replenished to their original balances as part of the settlement. Rachel's share of our joint savings was redirected there. Owen's and Lily's college money is back where it belongs. I got primary physical custody. Rachel has the kids every other weekend and one weeknight. The arrangement has worked without major conflict. She shows up when she's supposed to. She's a decent mother even if she was a poor wife. I keep those two things separate in my mind for the sake of Owen and Lily. By October I had repainted the living room. Rachel had always wanted gray walls and I'd always preferred the off-white we'd moved in with. I went back to off-white. Small thing. Felt significant. Owen had a good fall soccer season. I made every game. He scored his first goal of the season on a Saturday morning in November and I was standing on the sideline in the cold in my jacket and I cheered louder than any other parent there. He grinned at me from across the field. That's the image I keep. Not the blue F-250 parked in front of my house. Not Rachel's face at the kitchen table. Not the 529 balance screen on my laptop. My son, grinning at me across a soccer field on a November morning. That's what I was protecting. That's what the cameras and the documentation and the attorney and the 7 months of legal process were all in service of. Not revenge. Not winning. just making sure my kids had a stable foundation under them when the ground shifted. I was not a perfect husband. I probably missed things I should have caught earlier. I was too busy, too comfortable, too trusting. But when my son walked into the kitchen and told me about the man in the blue truck, I listened. I stayed calm. I did the work. That's all any of us can do.